Ladies and gentlemen, in today's video, we are going to cover a subject that plagues many chess players and a subject that many of you have requested a video on, and that is closed positions. Closed positions in chess are ones where both players have maybe 8 pawns on the board each, or 7 or 6, and the position therefore has 2 fences built up, and it's very difficult to maneuver. And I'm going to use certain terms in this video before we jump into the examples, terms like pawn breaks, space advantage, sacrifices, and we're going to implement those in every example that I'm going to show you. Timestamps are on the video player, and we're just gonna learn. It's gonna be great. We're gonna have a great time. So first, I'm gonna show you 3 games that my viewers, my subscribers submitted, and we're going to start introducing these concepts. Then we're gonna look at master level, so there's gonna be the next timestamp, which is grandmasters, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about different openings that come with a closed nature. So, knight to f3. This is a game my subscribers with the black pieces named Adam. We can actually look at it from Adam's perspective. Both players rated about 1,000. The game begins with a relatively standard opening. White is playing a King's Indian attack, and black is playing whatever black is playing. It's not actually super clear. Black is actually playing the regular development, but blunder a pawn on move 8 opening, which is exactly what occurs. Obviously, I can complain about that, but you're 900, this is what's going to happen. It would have been a little bit better not to do this, but okay. Now, this is the beginning of our lesson. So this position obviously would be nicer for black if black had all 8 pawns, but black does not, but fine. It's a position where black has more space. What the heck does that mean? Well, you see most of white's pawns are obviously on the 3rd rank, so they're not on the 4th rank. Black, meanwhile, actually has a little bit more control of the middle of the board and the transfer points, which can then kind of lead to the opponent's position, a little bit more development. A player who has many pawns on the 6th rank and not really engaging in the center line means that they are lacking space. But those positions are very prickly. So those positions are not super easy to break through. And for this example and for all future examples, we're going to be focusing on pawn breaks. So a pawn break is a spot on the board where a pawn trade can occur and therefore lead to opening of lines or infiltration of pieces and different vision of different pieces opening up, but also piece maneuvers. Okay, so let's see how Adam handles this position. Adam plays queen to d7 with the intention to maybe go in here. I like that, all right? Adam finds himself an opening. White plays d4, which leads to this check and kind of like a little barrier. f3 is not a great move, but we have bishop h3 looking to trade and infiltrate. And we have the following position. Now, this is a fantastic move. You see a weakness, you use your open line. In close positions, you're gonna have open lines, right? You need to go create an attack. Okay, now what? So if you start looking at any close positions pawn breaks, you're obviously looking at moves like c5, and the move c5 doesn't do you a whole lot right now. If anything, it just loses a pawn, but maybe it softens up the structure. Now you start looking at your pieces. Where can I locate in the enemy territory an infiltration point? You don't have one. You actually straight up do not have one. None of your pieces can access any of those squares. So in positions like this, what you want to do is take as much space as possible and just continue to stockpile pressure on weak spots if you can identify them. If you can't, sometimes that happens. Positions like this with white are like hedgehogs. Very difficult to get close and poke at them. But I like f5. Now, however, now we have mobility. This move f4 weakened these 2 squares dramatically. And you can't put your bishop there, but you can put this knight. You see, this knight right now cannot move forward at all. In many close positions, the knight is the golden piece. It can be rerouted, and in close positions, you can take as much time as necessary sometimes to reroute a piece to a better square. So something like bishop b6, like you see in this game, you see, both sides need to think about where their knight would be the best. Like white's knight would be best there, supported by, right, these pawns. And black goes for a pawn break, but white is so solid, white doesn't have to do anything about the pawn break. What I would have loved to see here is something like knight h8. Actually, for a while now, I would have loved to see knight h8. I would have loved to see knight h8 here. Knight f7, knight d6, and knight to e4. Planting that knight on the e4 square, and then that could lead to potential attacks in the future, right? When you have more space, you're gonna hear me say this a lot, when you have more space in close positions, you can attack, especially the king. Right, so what ends up happening in the game, queen e7, there's some maneuvering, you know, black pawn trades, but not in a great way. They open up the file, but white meets them right there. The queen goes for a little journey. The queen should never be leading the attack because the queen can't do anything by herself. We have some weird tactics here. Queens, rooks get traded. And actually, black does create a little bit of hope for themselves, but white is just right there. So white stops everything. And obviously, we have some tactics later on, but it ends up with Adam blundering mate. Adam didn't know what to do anymore with the bishop or the rook, so he went for a king hike and got mated. Boom. So you lose a game like this. What could Adam have done better? Adam could have obviously not blundered a pawn in the opening, but that was really the only mistake. The queen should never be doing the battle, but this knight was the offside piece for most of the game. Find that reroute, continue to pressure the weakness. Sometimes the pawn break is not going to work. Let's look at two games which actually had extremely similar structures. Two 1500s, 1600s, London, right? So sometimes this kind of pawn structure comes out of a Caro-Kann, which we're going to see in the very next game. And we're going to see in this position not a situation like last game where one person had a lack of space. The players are on equal footing here. They have pretty equal space. They're both in the middle of the board. So black does this. Black plays this move c4. And sometimes this happens in Londons or Caro-Kanns. So you're going to play where you have more space, okay? You're going to play where you have more space. White should be trying to create an attack on the king, or white should be trying, because they have more space here, to break in the center. So this is a very common break in the London to try to play like for e5. And as long as you're protecting this infiltration spot, you're going to be able to push these pieces back. And as I said, you know, the player that has more space on the side of the board moves like h4, and all of a sudden Greek gifts become possible out of nowhere. Because, you know, you didn't castle, knight g5, HG, boom, boom. Like, because you have so much more space, it's very difficult for the black pieces, like the knights and the bishop, to actually do anything, because you have more space that way, right? Whereas white is suffering a little bit on the queen side, but black doesn't have as many pieces attacking, right? So this kind of a structure, white should be focusing their play where they have more space, either pawn breaking in the middle or over here. This is not what white wants. b4 can lead to disaster, and now a4, b4, and now black has been let in, and white castles. So white is not pawn breaking or doing anything. So black continues to march in, and now white is really suffocating over there. And if black can prevent a kingside attack, black is going to be completely fine. I don't actually know the overall result of this game. White did end up going for some sort of attack, but completely in the wrong way. You're not supposed to attack with just a queen and a bishop. The queen should never be leading the charge in a close position, right? I just said that. So we see another example of this, and this knight is probably going to reroute and go win this pawn, and that's exactly what happens. And by the time white is marching with the pawns, it's too late. You took too long. So now you're collapsing on this side of the board. You see how all of this makes sense now? You have to be quick in close positions. You can't maneuver and go, oh, well, they're attacking me, now I'm going to attack them. I like what white did here, but it took white way too long. Now, see, white is doing all the right breaks and actually getting somewhere. At this point, white is actually better because black misplayed, but now white has to play g5, knight g4, knight f6, but white goes backwards. I mean, that's just, right? You need to play where you have more space. You have to use pawns as openings for other pieces, bishops, knights. White ended up getting, you know, crushed on the queen side. Moves like a3 and then rook a3, and that's it. I mean, by the time white got anything going on the king side, white was brutally hunted down, and some while later, the b pawn actually promoted and became a queen. So you can see it's going to be b1 queen. That does occur later in the game, and by the end of the game, white has only 4 pawns and a king versus an entire army. Very, very tragic stuff. So this game that I'd like to show you between Kalkaber and a person named Nodirbek, who named themselves after the superstar from the World Rapid and Blitz. This was a Caro-Kann, and this was a Caro-Kann, folks. You're going to recognize this pawn structure. You recognize this pawn structure from the last game. Very similar, right? This one, Kalkaber did not mess around. Kalkaber went, look at this, sidestepping with the queen before castling, and then playing for f4, f5. And even though black got the same attack that black got in the last game, the difference here is that white is fast. White is fast with the counterplay and led a devastating attack. But you know what? This is still too much. You still should not allow all of this. Probably the best thing for white to have done when a4 was played was play a move like, I don't know, castles. You know, something like castles, and then if b3 comes, don't take. Just chill. Just chill for a moment. And you know what would be a dream come true? For white to play a3. because now white completely stops the pawn attack and will just play f5 in a moment, and only white is playing with the attack, right? But I told you about sacrifices, right? We've talked about sacrifices, which is breaking through a blockade of pawns as well in close positions. I mentioned that in the introduction. So this game, again, we're playing where we have more space, but white is still making this a little bit unnecessarily dangerous. So you have to understand in close positions where the pawn breaks for the opponent are going to happen as well. Stop their counterplay and go on counterplay of your own successfully. However, Kalkbra made it work. Despite sacrificing seemingly the entire house over there, he managed to... I mean, black just blockaded their own pawns, so black did not play this correctly. It would have been better for black to play, to actually understand that the attack on the king side is very real to finish the development, but black just didn't do that. Black instead got their pawns blockaded, which is not what you want to happen. Well, look at this. I mean, they got their king hunted into the open, and actually got mated like on the side of the board a little bit later. So the king just got brutally hunted, and it was mate. This was walking through fire, but what really helped white here was the fact that black played with no bishop and rook. So if you play with no bishop and rook, it's probably a good chance you're going to lose. Again, if we stop this attack a little bit earlier than it got going, or we don't allow our opponent to infiltrate and get to our base of our operations here and take everything, you're going to have a little bit of an easier time. So pawn structures overlap. This was a slightly better thing than what we saw last game, right? Black playing full on one side of the board with key pawn breaks and infiltrating and targeting weakness, isolating a pawn and then winning it and continuing to break through. And white in this game went on a more successful attack, because if he hadn't done anything, he would have just got completely overrun. But that's like viewer games, right? And there's many different openings that lead to close positions. We're going to look at that later. But for now, let's take a look at some master games. So we've got 3 master games for you. One of the openings that leads to one of the most close positions in all of chess is the King's Indian Defense. This is a game between Tigran Petrosyan, not the recent one with some drama behind him, but the legend from Armenia, or Soviet Union back in the day, Soviet ties. One of the greatest players of his generation and arguably of all time, versus some guy named Sam. I don't know, Samuel Schreiber might have been a very strong player, but this is a very instructive game from 1962. And you see the center immediately closed. So, where are the pawn breaks? Where does white have more space? The queen side. So in the King's Indian Defense, black attacks here, white attacks on the queen side. Very standard, right? So black tries to break a little bit. Not right away, just kind of asking white what's going to happen in the middle of the board here. Petrosyan here plays h4, because he wants to do something on the king side to force black's hand. And he knows that in the future, black is going to play f5. f5 is going to be supported by the g pawn, right? And the bishop and the rook. But what he does is he tickles with this move. And if black takes, then you open up the h file. So black decides to keep it all closed. But now f5 loses its power because Petrosyan plays f3 and g4. So now by splitting the pawns, f5 is impossible, because you have 2 pawns controlling that square. So he splits those pawns away from black. Black will now no longer successfully play f5, and he has more space on every side of the board. He has more space on the king side, more space on the queen side, so there's no pawn breaks. Black has no pawn breaks. So what do you do in a position with less pawn breaks? We already talked about this, targeting a weakness. But white has no weaknesses. So white has no weaknesses. Okay, so if white has no weaknesses, we just have to reroute our pieces. Okay, how? Okay, we're trying to take a little bit of space. Petrosyan meets us right there, trying to mess with us a little bit, and that's it. I mean, black has no more pawn mobility. The only thing that black can do is begin transferring the pieces to the queen side, because black is dead on the king side, like completely positionally dead. And the game will be decided probably in this area of the board, right? Unless white somehow gets a knight to f5. Like knight e2, knight g3, knight f5. That's the kind of stuff you need to visualize. So I urge you to look at some master games and visualize where your knights can jump, where your bishops want to go, where the pawn breaks are for both players, right? There's no pawn breaks. But white has the only space advantage of the game, and that's the key move. Knight c5 here is black's attempt at beginning an operation of rerouting to the queen side, and Petrosyan takes the knight. Because the more pawns there are on the board for both sides, the bishops become weaker. The more pawns, the bishops are weaker. It's the knights that are $1 million pieces. And here's the $1 million move here, as far as I'm concerned. Black is about to play knight e8, knight d6 to reroute the knight, right? Knight e8 or knight d7 and try to come over here. So here he plays this move. This is the all-star move because it looks useless, but the point is you're going to take the knight when it arrives. And if bishop d7, I mean, maybe you'll take as well and you'll put your knight on c4, but you're going to see this. Look, he just takes. He just takes the knight right away because he understands that bishops won't do a damn thing here. They won't do a damn thing. All pawn mobility is dead. He plays knight c4. He plays queen b3. How is black ever going to do anything? Nothing. That's it. The game is over. Like, black can resign here. But the game goes on a little bit longer, obviously. There's still a little bit here. And I talk about this sometimes, you know, sacrificing to break through. You're not going to sacrifice anything. Like, just so you understand, if black sacrifices here, you're just down a piece. So you're not actually breaking through. Every criteria I've mentioned here, you lose. You cannot maneuver your pieces. You have no weaknesses you can target. You have no pawn breaks. This is a worse nightmare position for a player trying to break out. And it ends, I mean, very slowly, but white goes on to win. I mean, that's it. Black has nothing. So black loses in all the categories of close positions here, right? This is a fantastic example of negating the opponent's pawn breaks to the maximum ability, to use pawn breaks of your own, like a4, right? A4 is such an important move to target that pawn, to be like, what are you doing? You take me or you push? Beautiful game. Absolutely beautiful game. And I mean, there's so many more pawn structure masterclasses you can watch. Here's a great game between Hui Fan and Amin Tabatabai from several years ago. Hui Fan obviously was the women's world champion. Tabatabai is a very strong GM now. He wasn't a GM in this game, but this is from a Nimso Indian, a Hubner variation. Not the most important thing for the opening, but you're about to see, you see, we have a makings of a closed center. So here is like a very close center. So a lot of piece maneuvering is going to happen. Pawn breaks for and open files. You know, obviously this open file, maybe this pawn break over here, maybe this weakness. But most of the jostling is going to happen in this side of the board. It's going to be between the knights. It's going to be between the pawns. White is trying to maybe set up this pawn break. Hui Fan is trying to set up her own, right? Now white plays g4. So g4 is preventing f5, but drastically weakening the dark squares, right? Potentially weakening the dark squares. So what does she do? She goes to win the battle on the dark squares. Knight to e3, and now h5. h5 is a very interesting move. If you take, f5 becomes juicy, so f5 will become a possibility in the future, even at the cost of a pawn. And look at this. Look at this dark square battle here with the knights sacrificing temporarily her own to give a check. But again, she's playing on the openings and the dark squares of the position. And look at white's structure. And actually, what you're gonna see a little bit later here. The heck was that? Chess.com just like jumped backwards. It didn't want me to keep going. What you're gonna see a little bit later here is look at this. A total shutdown of white's pawn breaks. Like white just can't move all 5 pawns. So the person with more pawn mobility is going to be happier. White tries to break out. Look at this, a savage move. E4. Oh, so bishop's worst nightmare. They're just completely boxed in by their own pieces. So the open files here are going to be the difference and the maneuvering, right? So we see Hui Fan, she's playing on the open lines. Now she starts collecting. So sometimes when you just have a winning position like this, you just collect. You start collecting all the pawns because they're so weak. And then you're going to make the right trades. Notice how this knight has just hung around the entire game, right? So she uses the opponent's overextending against them, wins the battle on the dark squares, and she didn't really have to do a whole lot. But most of this came after g4. I've had games in these kinds of structures, let's just say hypothetically, where I go for a pawn break, right? Something like this. And you can take with a knight, probably. You can probably take with a bishop. I mean, I've kind of done both. And you get a position like so. And that pawn break now gives you new opportunities, right? That pawn break gives you opportunities to target the queen side because pieces got lost, so this is a little bit destabilized. But it also gives you opportunities to take space and bring your rook and maybe attack. So pawn breaks give you these opportunities, but you have to be focused and you have to play where you're stronger. Like you can't play f5, boop, like I don't know, for example, you can't play f5 and then I don't know, I'm just gonna make a random move and then switch your whole plan to play for b5. You can't really do that. Like, I would not recommend playing like that. You need to try to stay focused one step at a time in a close position because you have that luxury. The last master game is obviously this completely insane game between Demchenko and Duda. I talked about this in a recent video, so I'm not gonna revisit it. But this game was super locked, and it resembled a King's Indian defense, but it was actually from e4, e5. So we can already see what's happening, right? We can see that black is going to try to attack here, and white is going to try to attack here. That's what's going to happen. And it led to a completely insane game where one guy afforded the luxury of literally walking his king to the other side of the board, because that's how closed it was. But when you have more space, we've talked about this already today, that is where your advantage lies. So you can either attack a king or attack a side of the board. I don't see a black king anywhere here, so what is white doing attacking that side, right? Well, white completely runs away with the king, so the king is going to be safe from the incoming assault on this side of the board. But what white is going to do when you have such overwhelming space advantage, you can sack to promote. So you can afford yourself the luxury of maneuvering forever and ever, and at some point, while black is trying to break through, you see this? He sacks his knight, instant replay. He sacks his knight, and now he has a position like this. So it's not always an attack on a king in a totally locked position. It's also the fact that, you know, your pawns are going to be difference makers. This game between Duda and Demchenko was completely nuts. I made a video on it recently. And obviously it's a very crazy example where a guy walks his king up the entire side of the board and actually ends up with 3 queens. But the point stands. The point stands that you shouldn't fear close positions, and you need to play to your spatial advantage. And sometimes sacrifice is required, but I don't want to advocate too much sacrificing because, you know, my average viewer is not 2750, so they can do it, but if you sack your pieces, you might just end up down pieces. So, but sacrificing to break through a closed structure is kind of like the last thing. And last but not least, like conceptually overall for everything, I just wanted to have a quick segment on understanding the structure and balances of your opening. So what the heck am I talking about? Well, obviously we've seen the King's Indian defense. So if you're playing a King's Indian, which can lead to, you know, relatively balanced and close structure, something like this, you have to understand what the hell you're doing here. You have to understand in a closed center, okay, I'm supposed to put my knight on c5. So let's say something just very, very simple, like knight c5. To understand like how to keep a knight there, the reason you play a5 with black is so white can't kick you out. I talked about this. If you allow white to take space on the queen side in the King's Indian and boot you from the middle, white is just winning. I mean, white just has too much space. So white is going to just advance on that side of the board. You have to understand the opening that you're kind of playing. There's many, many, many games. Look at the game Hikaru Nakamura beat Boris Gelfand, one of my most viewed videos. How Hikaru launched just an insane assault of pawns on the king side in the King's Indian defense. So that is like a King's Indian. You have to understand how to play that opening. In semi-closed positions, so let's say a Benoni. So let's say d4, knight f6, c4, c5. This is not as closed because we traded a pawn. So it's kind of closed, but not really, right? So you have to understand how to play this position. Well, black is going to try to castle and obviously put some pressure on the e-file, right? Because that's black's target. White is going to try to restrict the development of the light squared bishop with moves like h3 and these pawns in the middle. Black is going to try to play a6 and b5. So to prevent that, you play a4. And that's how you jostle. Black is going to try to make a little pawn lever to infiltrate with the pieces. Every opening has its own flavor. And if you completely don't understand that, if you're just, you know, oh, every time they play e4 with black, I'm playing c6, boom. Well, you have to understand that in the Caro-Kann, in the advanced variation, you have breaks of c5 and f6. The same for the French defense. So in the French defense, you have this, right? And you have this and this. And at some point, one of them is good, and at some point, one of them is not so good. And this applies to all openings. If you cannot answer the question of pawn structure and how your position can close from an opening that you're playing, you're missing an entire component of the opening, which is something that you build up over time, experience, courses, as you build your expertise in chess. So, this is a subject that I can make a video on for like 3 hours, to be honest. I mean, people make paid courses on close positions. But for today, what I want you to kind of keep the most in mind, as we saw in some of the earlier examples that we were looking at, who has more space in a close position? Is it a position where one individual has more space than the other? either in the middle or on the left side or on the right side. Where is the spatial advantage and how can you take advantage of it? Understand that when you're playing against the spiky hedgehog, you might need to be a bit more patient. Take as much space as possible. Don't lose center pawns, right? Make the correct advancement into the middle or else you're going to get hit with a spiky little point. Trade the pieces in the right way. Reroutes, like we saw later in this game and throughout this video, rerouting in close positions, taking your time, finding, oh, my knight is trash. I should reroute it in an advantageous way so it's not stuck on the edge of the board forever, right? Pawn breaking at the right moment and trying to exploit. Don't let the queen be the one doing the battle in close positions. That's very rarely what you want to do. And understanding your opponent's counterplay, like understanding that this is a very serious thing. And if you can't defend your pawns, the breakthrough is going to be very fatal potentially. Sacrifices at the necessary moments, that's basically it. I mean, it's those three kind of major concepts of who's got the most space, playing on the side that you have the most space, and creating the correct attack, whether it's on a king or on a side of the board to a future breakthrough in an endgame. Or rerouting pieces that are not particularly great and inducing weak squares, taking advantage of weak squares in positions where you can plant a piece and go forward. And based on your own games, I would say that any position with 6, 7, or 8 pawns is closed. 5 pawns each, that's already like almost half the pawns gone, so it's very difficult to get a close position like that. But I hope this helps. I hope this points you in the right direction. It's very tough to make a video that's like 30 minutes long or more and try to keep your attention for the entire time. I hope with all of those examples, we did kind of a good job. If you're feeling like you're still not quite there, there are many other kind of videos out here on YouTube or paid or otherwise. But I hope that this is a good introduction. And if you want to kind of dig around more in the sandbox, you kind of can find your way. But this concept definitely needs to be addressed, and I hope this helps. So appreciate y'all very much. If there's any other concepts out there you're struggling with, do let me know in the comments and I'll make a video. I'll see you in the next one. Get out of here.